dancers, man. All right. All right, somebody tell me, raise your hand, what's your favorite superhero? Scarlet Witch, that's Marvel, right? Scarlet Witch? How many got the Scarlet Witch people? Is it because you watch WandaVision? Oh, okay. That lady's powerful, man. Jesus, because he walked on water. Iron Man. All right. Who else? Shrek. All right. Who's your favorite Avenger? Spider-Man? Captain America? Captain America? The Winter Soldier? All right. Who's your favorite Justice League guy? All right. Well, listen. There's one category that I think sometimes people are really passionate about. Sometimes it causes a lot of arguments. Just me mentioning some superheroes. I heard some moves and things like that. And what I think is interesting is that it feels like in the room here, most people are either a Marvel person or they're a DC person, right? So how many people in this room are Marvel people? You're like, I'm Marvel only. I don't really like the rest of it. Okay. How many people are DC people? Anybody? A few of you guys? Now, how many people did raise your hand? You're like, I don't even watch superhero movies. A bunch of weird people, man. All right, so I thought it was interesting. When I was a little younger than most of you guys, I used to read comic books a lot. I used to collect comic books. I like getting them. My favorite superhero, I had two of them. Number one was Captain America because it's Captain America, man, right? He had the red, white, and blue. I love him. And I love Spider-Man. Like, those were my two favorite, hands down, favorite superheroes. Still are my favorites. I'm just going to straight up tell you right now, the first two Spider-Man movies, total trash. Total trash. The ones that have the new guy, the new Spider-Man guy, yeah, I like his better. First two Spider-Man movies, complete trash, man. Didn't like them. Didn't like them at all. So, anyway, but here's what I know. When I was younger, there were always Marvel and DC comics, and so I liked them both. I mean, I was a Batman fan. I liked Superman and all that stuff. And so, but what I found out was there's a ton of comics from Marvel and DC that you almost kind of wonder if, like, one came out and then another artist from the other company goes, I'm going to make somebody just like him. You ever notice that about some of the comics? I found a few. I want to share with you guys a couple of them. First one here, I feel like Marvel copied this, is this Sif from Marvel and Wonder Woman. And it's interesting in the comic strip because if you look at it, they're both female warriors. They both come from mythological backgrounds, and they both use a sword and a shield in battle, and they both have almost the exact same power. There's another one here I want you to see. Quicksilver and the Flash, right? Basically, they're back, right? It says, spoiler alert, Quicksilver's dead. So, anyway. So, here's another one. The Wasp and Bumblebee. I'm not really sure how they're similar other than they're like human insects. That's all I know. Here's one that you probably don't know. Doctor Strange and Zatanna. They both like fight off mystical things from the planet. Zatanna needs to learn how to dress. But they both kind of have like the red cape, Doctor Strange vibe look. You guys are probably familiar with this one. Deathstroke and Deadpool, right? These are the two from Marvel and DC that they argue the most are so similar. Almost everything about them is the same, except their names and they're from two different superhero companies. Or what about this one? Swamp Thing and Man Thing. They're just from the swamp. I mean, I've never read one of these comic books, but like, what does he do? Throw a bite at you? I mean, sling some algae at you? I don't know what happens to Swamp Thing and Man Thing. And why is Man Thing called Man Thing if he's made from a swamp? Doesn't make sense to me. Whatever. You guys are familiar with this dude, Hawkeye and Green Arrow, right? I mean, Hawkeye, they both regular arrows. They shoot arrows that like split into 12 different things and shoot nets and electrocute people or whatever. And they do all kinds of cool stuff. To me, the weakest superheroes of all are these two. Aquaman, and apparently Marvel has Namor the Submariner. And they both don't like people that don't like the ocean. And they can talk to fish, so yay for them. They're awesome. And then, I love this one. Mr. Fantastic and this elongated man. Like, one genius sat around and said, hey, I'm going to make Mr. Fantastic. He's going to stretch, but I can't say stretchy man. We're going to go with elongated man, because that's a great name for a superhero. Oh, look, we need help. It's elongated man. What? Anyway, and then, of course, these guys, Ant-Man and the Atom, right? You know these guys, the Ant-Man. Basically, they make themselves really, really small or really, really big. You know, that's the way they work. And then, of course, the two powerhouse guys that aren't even superheroes, they're just rich. They're rich guys with big toys and lots of tech, right? I mean, let's look at Iron Man, right? He doesn't have superpowers. He just has a really good computer that makes really good suits. Let's look at Batman. He doesn't have superpowers. He just has a really smart butler that makes really good suits. So they're kind of saying. Yeah. All right, so. Okay, now that I got you talking, listen up for 1 second. So we can get done. Listen. Either way, it seems like most people love superheroes, right? Most people like superhero movies. They're great. In fact, superhero movies are kind of the biggest grossing movies of all time for most time. And people love them. Like the new thing was WandaVision, right? It's on Disney Plus. It's a great series. It's really cool. It was sad at the end, all that stuff. Spoiler alert. Did anybody watch the 4-hour Justice League movie? Anybody watch that time before? I got a chance to watch that at my house with the Hickey guys. I'm pretty sure I did a load of laundry and like 3 other things, and the movie was still going on. It could have easily been a 4-part series. It was a good movie. I missed the first hour of it. My dog had to go to vet. For some reason, my wife was out of town with another person from the Hickey family, and I had to go sit in the ER. Nothing. Literally nothing. The dog had a sore throat. Oh, I did not want to, but I did also do that for my wife driving 2 hours back to the house. Hated it. So anyway, so I think people love a good superhero. I think the reason is, though, is because, here's the deal. Superheroes fight the bad guys, right? They look for the less fortunate, and they do some crazy cool stuff that's really brave and cool and awesome and CGI stuff to help save the day. And basically, they see something wrong in the world, and they protect the world from it, right? Or they protect the least fortunate from it. And maybe we love superhero movies because in reality, we all love the idea of superheroes existing, right? I mean, wouldn't it be pretty sweet if you could have a little superhero help from time to time, like, you know, getting rescued out of AP US history, or, you know, the type of person that'd be like, they could push your college out to the top of the pile, or, you know, making life easier for a single parent for you, or whatever. Like, if we could have someone to come into our lives and do that for us, it would be great. And there are times in our lives where we just wish that someone would do something to help us out. We all go through those moments in our lives. You know, whether it's a health scare, or it's a parent with a job, or if it's just losing a friend or someone talking about you or being mean or whatever. And at these times we want someone to help us out and to make a change and to make things better, to solve a problem, or just to do something to help us. And what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks, listen, is that very thing. Is not really about Iron Man or whatever, you know, spoiler alert, he dies. You guys probably all seen that already. It's been a few years. But anyway, we're going to be talking about, listen, areas, some of the biggest areas in life that we all, listen, wish that somebody would do something.
different areas that we see. We're going to be talking about some things in the world that aren't quite right, and things that seem unfair. The stuff that we name, we call it injustice. And you guys live in a generation that sees injustice better, I think, than a lot of previous generations. And I want to talk about that for the next few weeks, and I want to see what God has to say about that, what Jesus tells us about injustice. And when I say the word injustice, here's my question. When I say the word injustice, what comes to your mind? Raise your hand and tell me. What comes to your mind when I say the word injustice? What's the words that pop in your head? Raise your hand. I can't, it's a bunch of crowd. Raise your hand and tell me. What pops in your head? Racism. What else? Sexism. What else? Raise your hand. What? Homophobia. All right. What else? What else? What pops in your head when you hear the word injustice? I can't hear. What'd somebody say? That's it? Those three things? What pops in your head when you hear injustice? What's the first thing that pops in your head? Sport? Okay. What? Classism? Okay. There are all these isms, right? What do you got? Slaves, right? Slavery. People get sold into the sex trade, different industries, all kinds of things, right? There's all kinds of injustices that happen. Hey, let me share with you a simple one. There are people that live down the street from you that don't have any money, probably, for some of you. There's tons of people in this city that are poor. There are people that don't get a meal because they don't have school that day. And that's injustice. When you start hearing that, I know it's a big word. You hear it a lot on social media and all these things, but here, let me just kind of break it down simple for you guys. And most of you know this, but just so you know, if you're taking notes, this is what we're going to talk about. Let me define it. Justice simply just means something that's right, that's fair, that's equal, right? I mean, that's justice, right? Someone hurts your family, someone murders someone or whatever. You go, I want justice, right? I want something that's right, that you want justice for that victim. It's right, it's fair, it's equal. But then injustice is really the opposite of that. Something that's not right, it's not fair, it's not equal. And people experience a lot of that in life. And so when we talk about injustice, we're talking about the things in our world that aren't right, that aren't fair, and that aren't equal in our lives. But you didn't actually need me to tell you that or even define that for you. For most of you, something came to mind when you heard that word, even if you didn't share it. Most of you know what that means. Maybe it was something big, like global human trafficking or global poverty or world hunger, or maybe it was something our country seems to struggle with right now, like with racism and stuff like that. Or maybe it's something local that feels unfair. It's right around the corner. It's something that you see in your school or that you see in your neighborhood or in your city that you notice. Maybe you have friends or even yourself have experienced the kind of injustice. Or maybe you experienced it and you didn't even know you experienced it because of certain things that are happening in the world today. Maybe you made it to, the side of TikTok over time that's helped you see injustice and experience it in a certain way. Maybe, when you think of that word, something comes to mind that maybe is very personal to you. And you may not experience it yourself, but you know people or you've seen it enough that it becomes personal for you. And here's the deal. I love that one of the things I love really and admire about your generation, Gen Z, is this you guys, maybe more than any generation in all history, you're aware of injustices happening in the world, especially the high school and college generation. Like you're aware of things that are going on. Some of you get so aware of it that you don't really investigate everything and you just kind of go off on things without actually really seeing what's happening. But we're going to talk a little bit about that over the next few weeks and get a worldview perspective from what Jesus has to say about injustice in the world. And here's the deal. So the real question is, does injustice exist? No, that's not the question we ask. The real question is, why doesn't somebody do something? Because here's what I think. You guys have gone through the last year in this pandemic, but it's also a very political year. And here's what I always hear from politicians and people is, we're going to do X thing to fix X injustice. And they all talk about it. We're going to fix this. I have a plan. I'm going to do this. We're going to do that. And here's the thing. Year after year after year after year, some of those things rarely ever change. And it's usually the church and other organizations that have a passion for the least of these that step in that make the most change. And what happens is you have a lot of politicians and a lot of people in power that use the plight of injustice as a way to garner votes and to get power and to get money for the things that they want to have. But nothing gets done from it. Nobody does anything. And so that's the question we're going to wrestle with. What does it look like? Whose job is it to do something about injustice? So let me be frank with you before we jump into this. For many of you in this room, when I ask that question, whose job is it to do something about injustice, you think of someone else. Some of you think, well, you're the pastor of the church, it's your job. Or it's this group's job. But you rarely look at yourself in the mirror and think it's your job. And I think it's because for many of us, we live in a world that is very far away from actually experiencing or seeing or being near close people that experience injustice in their lives. For some of you, it may feel real heavy. Maybe for some of you, because of your race or ethnicity, you've experienced some of this stuff. And so it falls on you in a different way, and it's affected your family or your friends, or maybe you have grandparents and parents that have experienced an injustice in their past that you never had to experience, but you have heard the stories and sat down and had the conversations. On the flip side, some of you haven't experienced the hurt of injustice. And instead, maybe you feel surprised by it a little bit. Or I say, that it is in the world. You're like, yeah, I see it. I know that it's there, but I've never really felt what these people feel when they do certain things, or they walk into a store, they get pulled over by a police officer or whatever. And maybe you found yourself asking the question still, why doesn't somebody do something about it? I was thinking about this. I listed a few questions. They're not in your notes. We're going to put them on the screen. Just some things have you ever asked some questions like this before? Why are there some students that never get into trouble, but they should, and then there are some students that get in trouble all the time and don't really do that much, right? You ever seen that in school? Or a question like, why do people still it's okay to be racist and sexist? Why do people still think that's okay? It's interesting, just the other day, I'm just going to be honest with you guys, it's kind of timely that we're talking about this, is that we had a Refuel a few weeks ago, and someone filled out an outline in Refuel with vicious, horrible, racist things. They did. And I'm not trying to accuse anybody in the room. I'm just saying someone did. They wrote terrible things that no one should have to see. And I'm thinking in my mind, really, this is 2021. How is it that happened? That people still think that. I don't know if it was a joke, or they thought it was being funny, or what. But I never really thought that was a thing that would affect this group of students. And please hear me. Don't leave here and go oh, we got a bunch of racists in church. No. Because every single week people walk in and out of the doors of the church, and you have no idea where their walk is with Jesus. And regardless of who that person is and what they wrote, they need Jesus as well. They need to have Christ change their life, change their heart toward people, change their heart toward understanding what it means to love other people. And I really wasn't even going to share that, but it popped in my head as I was thinking through this question. Why do people think it's still okay to joke about those things and stuff? Or a question like this, why does someone continue to get bullied and it seems like nobody cares about it? Y'all know who I'm talking about. You can probably picture somebody in school. It may be you sitting in this room. Why does this always happen to me at school? Nobody else around me seems to care. They make fun of me all the time. They pick on me. They do whatever. They cut me out of things. But nobody around me seems to care about it. Even my Christian friends, people that I see at church, that I see at school, they don't act like I exist. They don't act like I care. Why is that an issue? Why does that still happen? Or why does, somebody in your friend group, why do they have to go home to a house that doesn't feel safe? Probably most of you go home to a home that feels safe. But there may be people in this room that doesn't feel safe for them when they go home. Why does that happen? Why doesn't somebody do something about that? Why are there so many little kids in our community that go hungry when we don't have school, because they depend on the meals that school provides every day, but no one at home is feeding them. See, the point is this, is that when we see injustice, or we see it through our own experience or someone else's, it makes us start to ask some hard questions. Like when we really do see it. Like I can stand up here and talk about it, for 4 weeks. Will can talk about it. We can talk about it over and over. We can have life group lessons about it. We can talk about all these things. But until we really see it happening in front of us and begin to understand and maybe realize that for some of us it has happened around us in school or wherever else, on the weekends or around a friend group, we just never opened our eyes to see it. Until we do see that, we won't ask the hard question. It's not that we don't care about injustice. I think it's sometimes that we don't do anything about injustice because we don't get close enough to see what's really happening to ask the hard question. Because here's what I know, guys. It's very comfortable for me to live in my Chet's Creek Church world and stay in this little bubble. We hear that terminology all the time now with COVID, right? They're playing in the NBA bubble. They're playing in the NCAA tournament, March Madness bubble. All these things. What's that? It's to protect them from the stuff around them. But here's the reality. Many of us, and rightfully so, your parents, try to put this bubble around you in some sense, socially speaking, and spiritually speaking, and all these things to try to protect you from some of the outside influences in the world. And that is a good thing, and they should do that, and we should understand what that is about our lives. But at some point, we have to grow up and have to look outside of the bubble we've lived in and begin to see the world in some ways for the way it really is in a lot of places. Because the reality is, and I hope that Chet's Creek Church is a safe place for you to be, but most of the rest of the world outside of the walls of the church and outside of maybe your own family is not geared for your safety and your justice. Because we live in a broken world, and people are sinners and we're sinners, and everybody does things for themselves sometimes, and they hurt other people. And we're not the first to have this problem, though. See, we can talk about injustice, and we're going to talk about it in the next few weeks, but we're not the first to have it. You see, Jesus understood a lot about what's going on in the world today. It's part of the reason why he came, because the world was so broken, and the world's still broken. But the difference is now through the coming of Christ and the resurrection we celebrated last Sunday at Easter, we have a solution to the brokenness, the solution to the fracture that can bring us and people of the world back closer in harmony with God. Now, one of the questions that people ask Jesus all the time is basically like who are you cool with and who are you not cool with? Now, they use that terminology in the Bible, but they basically asking this exact question, like, hey, Jesus, like, who is it that you really think is doing it right, and who is it that you really think is doing it wrong? So oftentimes Jesus would share a story, and he would connect that story with the local surroundings. He would see something, in the city that he was in or in the countryside he was in, and he would connect the story with the thing that they were familiar with, so that the people around him would begin to understand the illustration or the story or the lesson or the truth that he was sharing with them. And that's what he did in this instance. And so Jesus begins to talk about, he's around these people and he sees these sheep and goat herders around him. And so he starts talking about sheep and goats. And so to kind of explain the difference here is that when you talk about sheep and goats, what he's talking about is the righteous and the unrighteous. Those are on the right side of what God says you ought to do, and those that are on the wrong side. So just think back to like superheroes. Like you got the good guys and the bad guys, so to speak, is what Jesus is talking about. And since you had these herders around, these shepherds that were there in ancient Israel, everyone would have been familiar with this example. And so you got this question that was posed to Jesus, basically like who is cool with you, Jesus? Like, who's in good standing with you? Who is it that's on the right side and who's on the wrong side of God? And in this story, the sheep, just so you know, are on the right side, and the goats are on the wrong side. They're not the righteous ones. So listen to what he says in Matthew 25. I'm going to read it real quick, and then we'll unpack it really fast, and I'll get you guys out of here. It says, then he will say to those on his left, and he's talking about God, depart from me, you who are cursed, into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer. So this is the people that he's teaching. Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? And he will reply, it's God talking, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. And then they will go away to eternal punishment, the righteous to eternal life. So he's explaining this story using goats and sheep and saying, hey, let me show you what the goats did. They didn't do these things. And the people were kind of looking at him like, what? So he distinguishes between the righteous and the unrighteous, right? The good guys and the bad guys. And he says, this is how you know, by how they responded to the least of these, the prisoners, the hungry, the sick, the strangers. In other words, people who need the most help, who feel the most pain, or get the worst treatment, is what Jesus is saying. Now you may go, well, that's a little extreme, right? Like you didn't give someone a cup of water, so this is their end game, right? Like what does that mean? But you got to understand that when they respond to him, they're kind of asking like, well, wait a minute, God, like when did we not do that? Like when did we not put clothes on them? When did we not drink, give them a drink or whatever? And Jesus, they're basically looking at him like, no, like never did I do that. That was never be me. And Jesus looks at these people and he says, but you didn't even see it. You didn't even see it. He says, whenever you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. Because Jesus looking like, you didn't do this stuff. And they're like, no. What are you talking about, man? And Jesus is like, see, exactly what I said. You didn't even see what I'm trying to tell you. And you missed it completely. He hadn't been physically hungry or thirsty. Jesus wasn't. Jesus wasn't in prison. But he wanted to make a point. Not only did you not see something about the injustice, but you didn't even see the injustice that's happened. And here's the thing, guys. When you don't see those who need help, you're not just missing out on seeing injustice. You're missing out on seeing Jesus. Now, I want you to think about that statement for just a minute. When you don't see those that are experiencing an injustice, you're not just missing out on the injustice. You're missing out on seeing Jesus, because he says in this story that when you don't see the least of these and you don't reach out to the least of these, you're missing seeing me in that moment. Now, you got to understand something. Remember, Jesus is sharing that he takes personal offense as if we don't see him when we choose not to see injustice. That's a big step that we need to get as God's church. That when we ignore injustice in our lives, we're not just ignoring the pain and the suffering of someone else. We're ignoring the fact that Jesus says, you don't even see me trying to allow you to work and be my hands and feet in the world. Because he says, whenever you've done to the least of these, you've done to me, to him. He takes personal offense at it. Remember, this is a story about who is good with Jesus and who isn't. And he's very clear about the answer. He's saying his people are people who see and act when it comes to injustice. Now, let me be very clear. This is not what it takes to start a relationship with Jesus. That is by faith in Jesus alone. Only in faith in Christ through grace alone can you be saved, can you follow and be a child of God. But Jesus is saying that when you follow Christ and you get to know him, that Jesus cares about injustice and he always speaks up for others and always fights for their rights. And so if you follow him, you become more like him and you begin to see more the way he sees, and you see these things in the world. And because of Jesus' example, you may begin to see injustice differently than you ever have before. And so your fueling point this week is this. Before you can do something about injustice, guys, you've got to see it. You have to open up your eyes and you have to see it. You can't continue to live in this behind a flat screen, YouTube live church bubble where you see all this stuff on social media that's really bad, and you can tweet with your thumbs, oh yes, I really support this injustice, and then never do anything about it, which is what 90% of the world does. It's what most celebrities do. Oh, look at this terrible injustice. This is awful. I'm bringing awareness to it, but they do nothing about it. And Jesus is saying, no. Feed the poor. Give those that need a drink. Reach out to those that are in prison. You see, that's where we need to start. We need to be able to look around and see what's happening. We need to be able to notice the injustices in our daily world. So I want to close out really quick with these three things. How do you do that? How do you see injustice? I want to challenge you guys over the next few weeks to begin to think about this in your mind. I want to challenge you guys to not take that piece of paper when you write down these three things and throw it in the trash on the way out, but actually take it and commit it to memory and say, I'm going to try to do these three things over the next month. Don't just walk into church and hear a message about injustice and walk out and never be different. Because when you do that, Jesus is saying, you didn't see me. Just like the goats. Whenever you do this to the least of these, you're doing it to me. So how do you do that? Really quick. Be close enough to see it. Now you got to be careful about this, okay? When I say be close enough to see it, I don't mean, hey, why don't you pack up your things and go move into the worst neighborhood in Jacksonville and spend a week as a kid there and experience the world there. No, I'm not saying that, okay? Don't go home and be like, Mom and Dad, I'm packing up stuff. I'm going to live with somebody over on this neighborhood because I hear it's really rough and tough. And there's drug dealers on the corner, and we're going to love people there because they're going to freak out on you. They're going to call me, and I'm going to be in trouble. Don't do that. But what I'm trying to say is this: be close enough to see it. How do you do this? And the first thing you can do is just pray that God would help you see the way he sees. And then maybe spend some time with people who are different than you. I mean, we have some different ethnicities and races in our own youth group. But for the most part, some of you guys are pretty homogenous, right? You all look the same. But maybe you step outside of that circle in your school and you try to spend a little bit of time. Now be very careful how you do that, because you don't want to spend time as like your best friends with someone that's not a follower of Christ and is really going way out there and is going to pull you in a different direction. But learn how to love other people that are different than you. Guys, in order to see what's going on in the world, you have to get to know people in the world, not just your circle. You got to know that. So get close enough to see. Strike up a conversation with someone in your class that's different than you. Sit next to someone in the cafeteria at school for your last couple of months of school, whatever. Get a job that'll help you meet people, so you're not just hidden behind somewhere. Volunteer somewhere, but be close enough to start to see it. The second thing is be curious enough to listen before you speak or post. Man, I want to repeat this. Be curious enough to listen before you speak or post. You need to circle listen like 5 times. Underline it. Put an asterisk by it. This is such a problem with Gen Z that people want to post and TikTok and Insta and Snap, all these little things before they've ever really listened to somebody. And what you do is you post something out there that you're completely ignorant of. I don't mean that in a derogatory term. I mean, you don't know anything about it, and you just post it. And then you find all this repercussions that comes back at you because you haven't taken the time to really listen to someone. I got a next door neighbor, Miss Ella. She's 95 years old. She's an African-American lady, the sweetest human being on the planet. Bar none. I don't care if you think your grandmother's awesome, she's not as cool as Miss Ella. I mean, this lady basically lived at the turn of the century almost. She's seen everything. Everything. She's 94 years old, still gets up every day and walks 2 laps around the neighborhood every day. Still drives a car. I don't want to be behind her, but she still drives a car. She's a cool lady, man. She's always bringing cookies over to our house every now and then. She's the sweetest person. It's so amazing because she's known our kids for years and she still calls them the wrong names. We just left. Doesn't matter. She's the coolest lady ever. And I'm waiting for this pandemic to get over, because the things that this world has gone through over the last, especially our country over the last couple of years, like I want to sit down with my phone on a stand and a camera. I just want to interview Miss Ella. I just want to sit down and say, Miss Ella, tell me about your life when you were in your 20s. Tell me about America. Tell me about what it was like when you were my age in the 40s. Like, what was that all about? Because she's seen it all, man. And this woman loves Jesus like you've never seen before. And I'm thinking, oh, you're 94 years old, 95 years old. Like you've got every reason to be angry at some of the things that you see in the world. But the difference is she's seen injustice, she's experienced injustice, and she understands Jesus is the difference. She's allowed him to make a change in her life. And just to sit and hear her talk about certain things is just incredible to me, to meet someone at that age that still has the energy to want to deal with a stupid person like me that's so amazing. It's awesome. So be curious enough to listen. The quickest way to see injustice is to listen to the people that are experiencing it. This is when real conversation really gets real. Because here's the deal. We are wired to avoid being uncomfortable. But when you ask the hard questions of people that experience injustice, for many of you, it's going to become very uncomfortable. And you got to be willing to listen. It's actually a good sign when you're uncomfortable about bad things. It means that you begin to see the way God sees, and you want to make a change. And finally, the last thing is be courageous enough to name it. And what I mean is be courageous enough to point it out and say, that is wrong. And we need to do something about it. It means that if it's wrong, say it's wrong. If it's unfair, say it's unfair. When you see injustice around you or even in you, be courageous enough to call it what it is. Here's the thing. So much of following Jesus is learning to see and think and live in a way that's not natural to you. That's the way following Christ is, because we have this nature that goes against what God wants for us in our lives. And one of the things that I love about your generation is that so many of you actually see and you care about what's going on around you. You may not feel like you can do anything about it, but you actually see it. And so what I'm getting at is this, is that you can be the generation to do something. You can be the generation to make change. And so I want to leave you with a quote and one last little point as we head out tonight. It's from an incredible writer. She wrote a lot about injustice in her life. Her name is Maya Angelou, and it's in your notes. She just says this: do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. See, guys, that's our desire as we talk about this over the next few weeks in Refuel, is that we would see better so we can know better and ultimately do better. Because for far too long, people have cried out for the church to make a difference. And there are churches that make a difference. And I believe Chet Street Church makes a difference in this community and around the world. I don't believe that we're a church that has blinders on, that doesn't see the world around us. But what I also believe is that we have a generation of students in this campus and our other 3 campuses that if you want to, if you open your eyes and you see what's going on around you, you don't need my approval. You don't need a church event approval. You don't need any of that. You just need to go be the hands and feet of Jesus, and when you see something that's wrong, go do something about it and change the world. And you have the ability to be the generation to do something. Because your generation is so connected. And you can change this world. And when you're my age, you can look back and see the world in a better place if we as a church stepped into the world and said, Jesus, we're going to be just like you said you were going to be. We're going to see you in the world, and we feed the hungry, and we fight for injustices with those that experience it in their lives. We're fighting for you because you love the least of these. You love the ones that are hurting and downtrodden. And God's calling you guys. You're not too young to make a difference. He's calling you to do it. And I hope and I pray over the next few weeks that we don't just have this, let's talk about these injustices. Oh my gosh, we've talked about it. We've seen it on TV. It's all over Snap, TikTok, Twitter, whatever. I see it on Instagram all the time. I'm so tired of it. Guys, God help us if we become tired of hearing about injustice. Because that means as a church, we've closed our eyes to Jesus Christ. We've said, I'm just going to ignore the fact that Jesus was. And I don't know where your parents are on this, but I'm just saying you as students have the opportunity to change the world. I hope that you start taking steps. Let me pray for you. Thanks for listening. A little long today. I'm sorry. But let me pray for you, and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the students. Man, so so respectful for listening for such a long time. And thank you for that. I pray that each of them would not leave here without just thinking about the injustices that happen in the world. I know so many of these students, they live in this safe space, and that's totally okay. We want them to be in a safe home, in a safe space, but God, help them to open their eyes to see what happens around them in the world. And not for it to be a shocking experience, but for it to be an eye-opening experience so that they realize the church and Jesus and even myself need to be the hands and feet of Christ to love the least of these and to fight for injustice, whatever it may be. Help us to love those that are hurting and to be the example the world needs to see Jesus in Chest Creek Church, and that it bleeds Christ into this community, and they see that it started from the young lives that are in this room. So I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey guys, guess what is next weekend? Are you, all right, hold up. I'm going to ask that question one more time before you get out of here. What is next weekend? Thrive Weekend! The Thrive Cup is up for grabs, baby. So get ready. It's going to be amazing. Love you guys. See you later.
Have a bunch of people to impress. I just want relief from my stress. Yeah.